Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of Wednesday, November 13th, 2019. The Planning and Zoning Commission is a citizen advisory group to the City Council charged with making recommendations concerning land use plans, planning processes, and or on matters of plan implementation. All regular meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission are recorded for record retention and transcription. The following is the official agenda of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Discussion and commission action will be limited to those items on the agenda. Any citizen who wishes to address the commission shall first be recognized by the chair and shall give his or her name and address for the record. If a citizen wishes to read documentation of any sort to the commission, he or she shall first seek permission from the chair. Oral testimony may be restricted to no more than 3 minutes per person. Agenda item number 1, roll call and disclosure of conflict of interest, ex parte communication, and site visit. So Aislinn, if you would call the roll, and if each commissioner would please state your name, what area you're from, and anything you may need to disclose.
Jared Burnt.
My name is Jared Burnt. I live in the Highland area, and I have nothing to report.
Jill Kirkham.
Jill Kirkham. I live in the Alameda area on Jefferson, and I have nothing to report.
Jack Moore.
My name is Jack Moore, and I live in the Old Town District, and I have nothing else to report.
Dorothy Ricks.
My name is Dorothy Ricks. I live in the Alameda area, and I have nothing else to report.
Ryan Satterfield.
I'm Ryan Satterfield. I live in the Highland area, and nothing else to report.
Kaylee White.
My name is Kaylee White. I live in the Alameda area, and I have nothing else to report.
And Shin Kyu Room is excused this evening.
Very good, thank you, Aislinn. Agenda item number 2, approval of minutes. Commissioners, any discussion on the minutes? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
A second?
Very good. There's been a motion and a second. Aislinn, would you call the vote?
Moore.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Burnt.
Yes.
Kirkham.
Yes?
Ricks.
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes, motion carries. Agenda item number 3, public hearing for subdivision ordinance changes. This time has been set aside for the commission to hear comments from the public regarding changes to Title 16 subdivision ordinance. The changes are to clarify and or update sections of the ordinance. If we could hear from the staff.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Carl Anderson. I'm with the Planning and Development Services Department for the record. Before you have a series of proposed amendments to Title 16 and 17, Title 16 being the subdivision regulation in Title 17. If it's okay with the Commission, I'll provide an intro to both and dive into 16 and 17 separately. On June 13, 2019, staff brought the proposed changes to City Council to a work session and received direction to proceed with the changes to Title 16 and 17. After the initial City Council work session, staff identified 18 local developers, engineers, and architects to review the proposed changes and provide comment. Of the 18, 8 agreed to review the changes and 3 written comments were received regarding the changes as presented to Council on June 13. 1 verbal comment was also received. Staff took the comments into consideration in preparing the proposed amendments that you have before you. Before both Title 16 and 17 were reviewed by the City of Pocatello Legal Department and no substantial concerns were raised. It should be noted that all noticing requirements have been met and no written or verbal comment has been received since the time of noticing. The subdivision ordinance was last amended in 2016, which modified sections of the code including the short plat process, the addition of the property line adjustment, and also the requirement for pre-application review for all subdivision applications. Since that time, and after working with the ordinance on a variety of subdivision applications, staff has identified multiple items that need to be addressed in order to improve the function of the ordinance in order to better serve the purpose of the subdivision regulations. And I'll go through kind of a bullet point list of what some of these amendments would be. The first one being alter the pre-application review process, making pre-application optional and at staff discretion. The reason behind this is some applications do not benefit from the requirement for pre-application review and may be impacted by the project's timeline. One example being a smaller short plat, 2 two-lot subdivision would be required pre-application review, the same way that a 40-lot subdivision would also be required pre-application review. What this does is potentially speeds up the timeline for some applicants to go through the subdivision process. This would be at staff discretion on a case-by-case basis. 2, originally the staff proposed the increase to increase the requirement for a traffic impact study for the preliminary plat at the council work session. However, based on comment received back, staff is recommending that the requirement for a traffic impact study not be increased in order to allow time for additional research to be done on that requirement for an increase in the traffic impact study. What that would have been would be for subdivision outlets, when that outlet for a new subdivision generated that, a traffic impact study would have been required. Staff is proposing to allow for some flexibility at the discretion of the Public Works Department staff regarding the requirement for an impact study. This may be waived as proposed by the Public Works Director or designee upon the receipt of a traffic analysis to be included as part of the application. 3, modify the request for public hearing process to more closely align with state code. This is, again, just to align that with how state code reads. 4, standardize the application requirements for preliminary plat and final plat in order to improve the consistency of both application requirements and the process for preliminary and final plat. This includes the reduction in the number of full-size plats to be submitted at the time of preliminary plat, and includes a requirement for a PDF copy of the plat. 5, remove the requirement for a surety bond to be released by City Council upon the acceptance of public infrastructure improvements. When applicable, this would remove the requirement for an additional meeting after the final plat and short plat process. The review would still include review by the Public Works Department as part of that release. 6, minor formatting modifications throughout the ordinance, which include deleting and consolidating duplicate definitions, correcting text, renumbering of section 16.28, and adding some flexibility where applicable to allow Public Works Director's designee to complete a review, which again allows for that flexibility. Detailed analysis is contained within the staff report, including the proposed amendments, and this concludes my presentation. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Carl. Other questions for Carl?
I have a comment.
Very good.
Thank you very much for this diligent work. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I do have one more question for you, Carl, here. On what is page 4 of kind of the revisions here, under section 16.24.110A, I see that we are taking out basically 2 definitions, one for subdivider and the second one is developer. The last sentence of that previous section says the surety bond shall be issued in the name of the developer as defined below and subject to these provisions. Is there a definition of developer somewhere that then refers to, or how are we defining developer?
So subdivider and developer, that was moved to the definitions section of code.
Okay.
So that should,
Gotcha.
This as defined below should be deleted and all
So as defined under
So
the
as
definitions.
defined.
Perfect. Okay, oh, that sounds great. Okay, anything else? Very good, thank you, Carl. All right, with that, we will now open the public hearing, and we would like to invite anybody who would like to speak concerning these proposed changes, and like to remind you that we would like to limit that to 3 minutes. Would anybody like to give any public testimony? There's not enough here to differentiate, so.
Thank you very much. Nikki Taysom, General Delivery, Pocatello, Idaho 83201. I had a couple questions in regards to the variance versus the term administrative adjustment.
Nikki, could we get you to speak up just a hair?
I had a question regarding the variances and also where it was going to remove the surety bond requirement. I want to make sure, is that for the developer won't have to have a bond for development? And also, the reason I ask that is sometimes if you don't do that and things fall through, then who's going to be stuck with what's the mess or any bills that need to be paid? Because there has been times when taxpayers had to pick up the slack on that. And so that is a question why I would oppose that if that's a situation going to be involved there. And then I wonder, I just went to one in Chubbuck last night, and they're pushing high-density housing, and I don't know where this falls in because I haven't said the document, as well as taking out big areas with big parking areas because it doesn't make tax revenue. There's not a business going on where there's big parking lots. So I didn't know if that was what he meant by traffic when he referred to traffic and some of the changes. So I'm sorry I didn't read the document before I came, but I just wanted to understand and clarify that because we now have big businesses like Kmart and others that are standing empty and they're not going to be able to provide a revenue, but that's not, should not be the ultimate goal, is money behind everything. So those are some questions I had and why I'm opposed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else that would like to speak?
Are we just supposed to address the
Right now, we're
zoning
just doing the
changes?
the
I'm just curious
subdivision.
on this
If you would give us your
Oh,
name
Victor
and where
Watts.
you're from.
Pocatello. So the Haymare.
Sorry, can you
We
repeat
did-
it? We didn't catch
Victor
it.
Watts. Pocatello.
Okay,
Victor Watts.
Yeah.
thank you.
The Hanson building on First, they're gonna try to change that to like a residential, commercial residential, I think. It's my understanding like industrial is a higher level than residential and so forth. If changes are made, is it just as easy to go back the other direction in the same process?
And that's a good question. We're probably going to have the staff respond to that and kind of give a site any questions that you ask. But if there's any testimony that you would like to give, we're happy to hear that.
But as far as just specifics about what they're doing there, can I comment on that tonight, or is this just about?
Really, all we're looking at here and at this particular public hearing is the adjustments to the subdivision ordinance.
Oh, not number 4?
Right, yeah,
Just
we're
do
still on
city
number 3.
council.
Yep. So, all right, thank you. Carl, could we have you come forward and perhaps give some light on some of the questions?
Regarding the surety bond, that's not removing the requirement for a surety bond. What it's doing is removing the requirement that the surety bond be released by City Council. The current process works where the Public Works Department drafts a punch list for a proposed subdivision. Upon completeness of that, they would schedule that for City Council. What this would do is allow the Public Works Director or their designee to release that surety bond, which would still be required before and not go to City Council. So basically saving the applicant another meeting before the surety bond release back to them. The variance I will touch on under Title 17. And as far as parking goes, the traffic impact study is not in regards to parking lots. What it is the number of trips generated. What the code says now is that for a subdivision that has over 100 peak hour trips, that a traffic impact study analysis be required as determined by the Public Works Director. What we're saying is that some relief be built into that on a case-by-case basis upon the receipt of a traffic impact analysis, which is a little less of a, you're still getting to look at it, but at a lower elevation level. So that would not be allowing for parking reduction or anything like that. So, in regards to development along within the warehouse district, this is not an application for any zoning over there. We do not currently have an application, as many current applications have been withdrawn over there. It should be noted that the comprehensive plan land use designation for that area is mixed use, which does not align with the current zoning of industrial and light industrial. And I'll get into more depth on that if required under Title 17. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. All right, and I guess I should ask if there's any more public comment. prior to closing this public hearing? Very good. We will now close the public hearing. Commissioners, this item's before you. If there are questions that you feel you need answered from staff or anyone else, that is acceptable. We're open to discussion or comments. And I guess I'll start by agreeing with what was said previously. I want to thank the staff for all of the work on this. I know that it's not an easy task and can be time intensive making sure that all of these things line up because things are constantly changing. But I think this has been laid out very clear and appreciate that. I think that the things that are being presented here are a way of kind of cleaning things up and making the city function at a more efficient level.
I did have a question. What if the designee or the City Works Department clears the bond and everything hasn't been done? What is the process to make sure that that is actually done?
Merrill, yeah, if you'd come forward and kind of address that.
Just trying to make sure corruption doesn't happen.
I think that was talked about earlier that there's the punch list, right? And they don't get their money back until everything's punched. And so nothing's going to be, no checks be written out or bonds going to be getting back until signatures and punches happen. I don't think that it's probably going to be impossible for that to happen before then, right?
Merrill Coyle, the Public Works Engineer for the City of Pocatello, and I am that designee, I guess you'd say. So to answer the questions is what you're asking for, is there's different processes that can be avenues to get where you're going. So one of them is that the plat isn't even recorded until all the punch list items are done. The punch list is done by each department. Designee goes out at the end of the construction. We go through the subdivision, we pull manhole lids, we pull water valves and so forth, and we create that punch list. And then when everything is done, then the plat is able to be recorded and building permits issued. But until then, there cannot be any of that done. So that's kind of our fail-safe in that aspect, that with all the different departments and eyes looking at it too for their own asset.
So it's just not one person?
No, it's I'm the designee, but I have full public works staff that I'm relying on, and then I'm checking it myself too to create that punch list and going through our standards. And for instance, the water department will go out and they'll look at all their water assets that's out there. WPC will go out and tick theirs, the stormwater, surveying will go out and so forth. And then I go out and take over a general look at everything too, and then we compile the list to go out. The other way is if they want to record that plat early, then the engineer for the developer will compile all the bid that's there for all the public infrastructure and so forth. And then for 125% of that estimate that is also reviewed by the city can be posted, and that is not released until the plat, well, that's not released until the same thing goes forward. So I think we've got some fail-safes and checks and balances there that has not failed us at this point, and I've been doing this portion for just under 25 years. So.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Merrill. Any other discussion? Is there a motion someone would like to make?
I move to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to Title 16 subdivision regulations, finding the amendments in compliance with the comprehensive plan and the subdivision ordinance.
I'll second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Aislinn, would you call the vote?
White,
Yes.
Reed,
Yes.
Burt,
Yes.
Kirkham,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes. Motion carries. All right, agenda item number 4, public hearing, zoning ordinance changes. This time has been set aside for the commission to hear comments from the public regarding changes to Title 17 zoning ordinance. The changes are to clarify and/or update sections of the ordinance. Carl, if we could have you come forward and present.
Good evening. Again, Carl Anderson, City of Pocatello Planning Development Services, for the record. So Title 17, as stated previously, did follow follow the same process as Title 16. It was brought to City Council for a work session on June 13th. It was also sent to the same 18 developers, architects, and engineers. 3 comments received were in total for both 16 and 17. This Title 17 was noticed, all noticing requirements have been met, and again, no written or verbal comment has been received by staff since notice was sent. So the current zoning ordinance was last adopted during a full repeal and replace in 2008. The comprehensive plan was last updated in 2015. There was an effort being done to align the current zoning ordinance with the 2015 update to the comprehensive plan. However, due to turnover, that was put on hold. What you have before you is an ordinance that's intended to more closely align the zoning ordinance with our comprehensive plan. It's not a full repeal and replace, but rather to improve the function of the ordinance and address known concerns with some other corrections and proposals. I'll go through that now. For instance, consolidate similar code sections to make the sections more user-friendly and remove inconsistency. All uses and bulk placement requirements are now located in one place. So, for instance, all residential, commercial, and industrial uses are now contained in one table, and same with all setbacks, bulk placement requirements. All development standards are now in one place as well. We have our section of code titled Development Standards. Those, rather than being contained in 1703, have been consolidated into that same section. So rather than having to flip to different sections of code, either as staff or a member of the public, it can be cumbersome, and that's to improve the function of that section. Again, this allows for a more linear review of the zoning districts for both staff and members of the public. Additionally, staff is proposing to remove the neighborhood commercial zoning district from Title 17, as there are currently no properties with this zoning designation. It is not located anywhere on our zoning map. We've also not had an application, at least in my tenure, to rezone a property to that use. Remove the land use exception process from code. Basically, this process, the land use exception process, was put in code when conditional use permits, variances, I believe sign exceptions were required 2 public hearings, Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. The current process is that 1 public hearing be held. The applicant or an affected party may appeal the decision at that public hearing to City Council. Additionally, we have not processed a land use exception application since 2012. Staff essentially finds that this is not necessary at this time. Minor formatting modifications throughout the ordinance, deleting duplicate not applicable definitions, correcting text, renumbering of multiple sections of code as detailed within the staff report. Changes to some land use processes, align the conditional use permit to Idaho State Code, specifically regarding the conditions which may be attached to a special use permit. Additionally, it's proposed that the administrative variance be required to meet the requirement of a variance, as the current process allows for what was in effect a loophole under our current ordinance. So the current requirement essentially, if you have a minor variance of up to 10% from code standards for things like setbacks or height requirements, things like that, an applicant may submit a minor variance application, and provided that they get all signatures of adjacent property owners, then it was approved. What we've seen a lot is essentially an application would come in, own all adjacent properties, and basically get height or setback requirements relief. Also, state code states that a variance is not a right or special privilege, but shall be based on undue hardship. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially this is intended to align that more with state code. So what we're proposing now is based on comment received to decouple it from the variance process entirely and retitle administrative adjustment. This would not require the adjacent property owner's signature. However, the applicant would still need to demonstrate that the proposed 10% modification would not create a negative impact that would jeopardize the health, safety, or general welfare. For instance, if staff were to determine that it did generate that type of impact, the applicant may still file a variance application for that. Additional land use changes. Under this section, accessory dwelling units would no longer require a conditional use permit. Currently, all accessory dwelling units are required to meet the standards of accessory dwellings under 1706, 100, I believe. What we're proposing is that provided that they meet all the standards for an accessory dwelling unit, they're not also required to submit a conditional use permit application. Accessory dwelling units are permitted and currently by conditional use permit in all residential zoning areas. A change to the original town site overlay is proposed, setting the height at the height permitted under the zoning district rather than the block face average. So the original town site overlay heights requirement is different than, for instance, residential medium density single family, which permits 35 feet in height. If it's in the OTO, what it currently says is that the height shall not exceed, I believe, 10% from the average on the block face. Essentially putting the onus on the applicant to find the average height on the block face and not exceed that by 10%. What we're proposing is that that be capped at what the height is in that area. This is partially due to incentivize development, but also improve the enforceability of that. Additionally, staff is proposing to include the warehouse district and new development in the central commercial zoning district for meeting the current parking requirements for new development. Currently, that section is specific to central commercial and is only for existing buildings. When a new development or new use comes in, they not meet that standard. What that is to more closely align the parking configuration in both of those areas and also to incentivize development. Finally, the modification to section 1702-170K, which is the minor variance, will require a citation correction to City Code 1520.240B.2 and 8. That's within our sign code. It references back to the minor variance process for those applications, so that would need to be changed. Upon legal review, this section would be brought forward for modification at the time that the sign code is updated. A detailed analysis is contained within the staff proposed amendments. Staff finds the proposed text amendments meet the standards of City Code 1702-180 and are in the community's best interest, consistent with the existing provisions of the zoning ordinance and the 2015 comprehensive plan. Staff recommends the commission take action to consider the proposed amendments and take action to recommend approval, deny, or approve with modifications of the proposed changes to City Council. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Carl. There's a lot here. Commissioners, questions?
17.02, 160, you have two sections, and one says that you need a criteria, but there's no criteria listed.
So I might, and I'm not sure exactly where you're looking.
Are you looking at F?
Oh, what's that?
1702-160F?
Yeah.
So what you have here as part of the attachment is an excerpt from code with only the sections that are being changed. What that is referencing is the criteria that is still within code that has not been changed for a variance application. So those criteria are there. This is only referring to how that criteria will be reviewed. Basically, the facts and circumstances of each proposal shall be reviewed and a decision rendered in the form of written findings of facts. Trying to clarify some verbiage there, essentially.
Oh, okay.
That's for a variance
Well-
application. Those criteria are still in place.
All right, then you probably need to get rid of the following criteria, or,
Well, the
No,
criteria.
those
yeah.
criteria are still in place in code. What you have again is an excerpt. So you'll notice that it goes A, F, and K. You're only seeing the sections of code where there's a change proposed.
So it still exists. It's still there. It's just not printed here because
oh, I see.
we're only
I
looking at
understand
what's
that.
adjusting.
That makes a lot more sense.
So clarify for me a little bit. So the concept of minor variance is going away, or it still exists?
Essentially, again, so the current minor, the way it is currently, there are two things there. So one is that, as by state code and by our current ordinance, a variance is not a right or a special privilege and shall be demonstrated upon undue hardship, usually due to the configuration of the lot, things like that. What the current minor variance process allows for a 10% modification to a proposal as long as all adjacent property owner signatures are obtained. So for what I stated also, there are cases in which somebody may obtain a minor variance without getting any other adjacent property owners because they own all adjacent property. So there's kind of two things there. One, that process does not demonstrate undue hardship. And two, it does not really allow for there to be any sort of review of that, essentially, whether it's by an adjacent property owner or not. So again, there's really two things there. What we're proposing is to still allow for that up to 10% flexibility, because, I mean, frankly, it's not necessarily always black and white. Something may need a 10% modification. So we are proposing that that be an administrative adjustment, which is not a variance. It's separate from that. Really, it's built into our development standards. However, that applicant would still need to demonstrate that no negative impacts would be generated from that. So there would still be a form with a proposal that staff would review, and they would need to demonstrate that no harm towards the public health, safety, or general welfare. Not sure if that's verbatim from what I have written, but just essentially demonstrate that there would no harm generated. For instance, if staff, upon that application, finds that there is harm, they may still apply for a full variance application.
Okay. And so, but there doesn't have to be undue hardship under an administrative adjustment.
That's correct. So again, kind of meeting, it's still getting reviewed,
Right.
and it's also decoupling it from the variance,
Yeah.
which does not, in staff's interpretation, meet state code.
But the administrative adjustment, only the full variance then would require signatures from, does a full variance require signatures?
A full variance does not require signatures of adjacent property owners.
Okay.
It requires that all adjacent property owners receive public notice.
Okay, perfect. Very good. That's all the questions I had. Other?
So as an example, like the variance would, the height requirement, if you're still want to go above everything's already at the height, maximum height, and you want to go 10%, you would still have to apply for a variance.
So if you what you were proposing to do was less than like 10% or less, you could submit this administrative adjustment. So for instance, somebody was required to, the height limit was set at 20 feet, they wanted to go 22, they would submit an administrative adjustment. Now, if they wanted to go 22 and a half or 23, they would be required to submit a variance application because it exceeds that 10%. The 10% is precedent. It's the number that has been used for, to my knowledge, since this application has been in place.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
All right, and then I guess as a matter of clarification too, there was, oh, do you have something else? Yeah.
I do,
Okay.
if it's okay.
Yeah.
As a matter of public comment received at the last session for under Title 16, I would just like to point out that this ordinance does also propose that upper story housing be permitted in the warehouse district. However, the zoning there is, based on past applications, we've seen the zoning really crosses several different zones in that area, at least industrial and light industrial. In some areas it includes more. So what you would see there is the ground level uses would still be what's permitted in those zones. What we've seen is that there are a handful, we're not sure how many residential uses along that area, probably legal non-conforming, have not been verified. What we're proposing is that upper story housing would still be permitted in the warehouse district. Again, it's still, it's only the uses permitted under the industrial zone at the ground level, so in storefront.
And I believe that there was an article in the Idaho State Journal stating that there would be a public hearing about a renovation at tonight's meeting, and based on what you said previously, that has been withdrawn.
That has been withdrawn.
Okay.
And I would like to point out too, under Title 17, the section of code on the front page of your staff report does list a series of criteria to review proposed changes to the zoning ordinance. Basically pursuant to 1702 180F 1 through 3, those being the community's best interest, that the amendment is consistent with the existing provisions of the zoning ordinance and consistent with the provisions of the comprehensive plan. That area is still designated under the 2015 comprehensive plan as mixed use, and there are, as you'll see here under table 2, there is an analysis of the comprehensive plan and the proposed amendments, basically a finding of the goals and objectives that the proposed amendments would meet to bring into compliance.
Awesome. Okay, very good. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
All right, we'd now like to open it for any public testimony. If there's anybody that would like to speak concerning these zoning ordinance changes as they've been proposed and that could provide the commission with any testimony, we'd invite you to come forward.
Victor Watts, Pocatello. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. So are they not doing the project on?
That is not part of this meeting tonight.
It's about the zoning.
This is just about zoning in general. Yep.
Does it, the mixed use, does it change? Is it per parcel? I don't quite understand. Or is it the whole warehouse district that's changing the zoning?
So the whole, it's proposed here that there is, and we can have Carl come up and clarify that, and actually that's probably what I'm going to do is have Carl clarify what those zoning proposals are in those districts that will then allow for some residential to be on upper stories.
Do you know if the height changes, does it go shorter now or anything?
From what
like
we
that?
see here, that does not change anything in the heights.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah, if you can just clarify what changes and what doesn't change. If it's including everything in there, you can still have mechanical stuff in that area, and I don't quite understand this change how it will affect the other parts of it.
Sure, perfect. Yep, we'll get that
Height and,
clarified.
use, I guess.
Very good, thank you.
Nikki Kasem, General Delivery, Pocatello, Idaho, 83201. I'm opposed for several things. One, I wanted to know who gives the administrative variance. Is that the city council, the mayor, your department, or public works director? Because I'm concerned that that is a way that things can be done and not done correctly to give people favors. And I also wonder if any of this is falling under the international code changes that have been going on with land use as well as development and construction trades, because if that is, I'm highly opposed to that. That's UN things. And the change by the 10% in terms of, I can understand if it's not going to be that big of a deal that you wouldn't have to get signatures. But I just see more and more things moving away from giving the city council legislative powers, from people in the community having our personal rights met and ignored. I also wanted to know if this is applying to everything across the board or specific districts. like warehouse, residential, whatever. I'm highly opposed to the mixed-use creative community things, PUDs, because it's laissez-faire development. There's been some nightmarish things happen because of that. And it again falls back on what kind of money can be made, and permits, whether they're conditional or development, subdivision plats, whatever, have been made. And then we're stuck with this nightmare a few years down the road when somebody else wants to change the ballgame. I see that in Chubbuck on Burley Drive's a prime example. And so I'm all for organized, very well done development. That is what makes a town nice to live in. But I am totally against anything with this international code, as well as, like I said, the laissez-faire type development things, PUDs and creative communities, mixed use. I mean, put yourself in the place of, like up on East Center Street, up here, Bill Isley's projects. Some of those have been a nightmare for the people who ended up buying the properties when sewer lines were able to put on a big steep slope on top of fill dirt, and it sinks, and then they're stuck with how to fix all this, or their foundations sink. And so I don't know if that's in any of that part, but that's what I've noticed. Even the ingress and egress is now under international code that allows 100 homes on one road. So I'm sorry I haven't read up what you're trying to do here, but those are my huge concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Constitution.
All right. Carl, could we have you come forward, and then I guess in answering some of these questions, I'm also going to say that the city staff is always available to answer these questions afterwards as well, and can give you more specific things. But I guess for our sake, what we're trying to do here is gather testimony that will help us to move forward with a decision on what is being proposed here. But Carl, perhaps you could touch on a couple of those things that have been.
Yeah. Okay, so it should clarify, this is the proposed changes are not a change to current zoning designations for any areas. So the current zoning map and those current zoning designations are still in place. So for example, in the warehouse district, the current zones there are still in place. So this isn't a proposed change to anything like that. So that means that on any given parcel, as long as that parcel is zoned, industrial use is permitted there, would be permitted. So there's no dimensional height changes being proposed, or setbacks, things like that, as far as the industrial standards are. Under residential for multifamily developments, there's one addition that they made parking lot setbacks as consistent with commercial development. Basically, so for an apartment, that they still would need to set that apartment back, or the parking lot for that. I'll direct your attention to under the new section 1703-500, the use table, note 7. So the current note that's applicable to central commercial and commercial general zoning district states that residential uses are permitted outright in upper stories, provided that ground floor commercial use is also provided on the property. What we're proposing to add to that, for industrial and light industrial zoning districts, residential uses are further restricted to the designated warehouse district. So you'll see an R restriction for multifamily in both of those zones with this section saying that upper story residential would be permitted in those two zoning districts, provided that they're within the warehouse district. So again, allowing for upper story residential, provided that the ground floor use still meets the standards there. There is potential for some conflict of use. However, the uses along the warehouse district are very diverse, and this is to allow for some more flexibility there. While I'm thinking about it, nothing we're proposing is intended to meet the current international zoning standards or anything like that. Again, this is intended to bring our code into compliance to better bring our code into compliance with the 2015 comprehensive plan and to correct changes and improve the function of it. It's not intended to align it with national code standards or anything like that. So currently, the minor variance process states that somebody may submit a minor variance application as long as what they're proposing is less than 10% modification, and all they need is the adjacent property owner's signature, and that's the approval, essentially. So they submit a form, the fee is $10, they get those signatures, and as long as they have those signatures, then that change is approved. What we're proposing, that no longer be the case, and that be decoupled from the variance. Again, staff's interpreting that does not meet state code, and that we create under 1703-0600 dimensional standards, the administrative adjustment, which, similar to the minor variance application, would allow for modification to setback, building height, minimum lot size, minimum landscaping, building footprint size standards, by up to 10%. Again, provided that that applicant demonstrate that no harm is being generated. Staff would be the reviewer of that application as it's currently proposed. Again, if there is a concern, then a variance may be submitted. So if the applicant disagrees with staff's finding on that, they may submit a variance application. What am I missing?
I think you covered it. Thank you, Carl. Any discussion, commissioners? I don't see anyone else that is looking to testify in, so we will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion and/or motion.
It seems to me that a lot of the changes here for usability, just minor changes, usability and readability. And, yeah, most of it.
I move to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to Title 17 zoning regulations, finding the amendments in compliance with the comprehensive plan and the criteria listed in Chapter 17.02.180.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Very good. It's been moved and a second has been made. Aislinn, if you would call the vote.
White,
Yes.
Kirkham,
Yes.
Berndt,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Ricks,
Yes.
Satterfield.
Yes. Motion carries. That concludes our business for the evening. Thank you for coming.